My name is Eleanor, Eleanor Vance, though for most of my life I was known as Mrs. Miller, a good, solid name that sounded like fresh-baked bread and starched curtains. A name that fit the woman I was supposed to be, the woman everyone saw. They called me the backbone of this town, a saint, the perfect mother and wife. People would stop me in the grocery store to say, "Eleanor, you've always been so strong, so selfless." And I would smile, a practiced, thin-lipped smile, and thank them. But you know, a backbone can break under too much weight. And sometimes selfless is just a polite word for lost. Today, on my 80th birthday, I'm sitting in this little house, in the silence that fills a home after everyone has gone. My husband, Robert, passed 5 years ago. My children are grown, with their own homes and their own busy lives. The grandchildren call on Sundays, a quick, happy chat, before they go on with their day. And I am left with a house full of memories and a soul full of music that was never played. It's a strange thing, aging. Your body forgets little things. The way to the post office, the name of the woman who lives next door. But it remembers everything that truly matters. I can't always find my reading glasses, but I can still feel the cold ivory of a piano key under my fingertips from 70 years ago. I remember the smell of the old music hall back home in Boston, the way the sound of a good sonata could fill a space, could fill a person, until you felt you might burst with joy. This was the first life, the one I chose. I was a pianist, not just a girl who played, but a musician. My hands, still gnarled with age, were once quick and graceful. They were my everything. I practiced for 6 hours a day until my fingers ached. My teacher, Mr. Harris, was strict, with thin, stick-like fingers and eyes that saw every mistake. But in his eyes, there was also admiration. He said I had a gift, that I didn't just have technique, I had a soul. He said my music told a story. My parents weren't rich, not by a long shot, but they'd scraped and saved for lessons. My father, a factory worker, would come home with tired hands and a face smudged with soot, but he'd always wash up and sit in the corner when I started to play. He was a man of few words, never speaking about music, but I'd see him tilt his head, close his eyes, and the corners of his lips would turn up in a faint smile. That was all I needed. My mother, on the other hand, always wanted me to be sensible. "Music is nice, dear," she'd say, "but you need to find a good husband. Men don't want wives who bang on the keys all day. They want wives who can cook and keep a home." And so, I waited. I knew I had a talent, and Mr. Harris knew it. He sent my application and letters of recommendation to Juilliard, the top music school in the country. The days dragged on. I lived in anticipation. I dreamed of New York. I imagined walking through the streets, sitting in small coffee shops, and listening to great musicians perform in concert halls. The letter came in a thick envelope, the seal a promise of a future I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. I locked myself in my room, placed the envelope on the bed, and stared at it, not daring to open it. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. It wasn't just news. It was a verdict, a yes or a no. I slowly tore open the envelope, and inside was, "Congratulations, Eleanor Vance. You have been accepted into the Juilliard School for the fall semester." My body trembled with joy. I took the letter and ran to my father. I saw him smile. He was proud of me. He hugged me tighter than he ever had before. It was the happiest day of my life. But it also turned out to be the last happy day for many, many years, because life has a way of laughing at our plans. My father got sick. Not a sudden illness, but a slow, creeping one that took his strength and our savings. The doctors said he needed constant care, a quiet environment, a loving hand. My mother, worn down by worry and work, looked at me one afternoon. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there with her tired face, her hands twisting her apron. "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, "we need you. We can't afford a nurse. Not with all the bills." I knew what she was asking. It wasn't a request. It was a plea, a debt, a daughter's duty. "It won't be forever," she promised. "Just until he's a bit better. Or until you save up." And I wrote a letter to Juilliard, the hardest letter of my life. I didn't just defer my admission, I gave up on it. I told them I was grateful for the opportunity, but that my family needed me. I folded the letter, a piece of my soul wrapped in an envelope, and sent it away. I never told my father. He died thinking he was the reason for my happiness, not the cause of my biggest sorrow. After I sent that letter, I tried to pick up the pieces. For a while, the piano sat in the living room, like a tombstone for a dream. I would touch the keys, but it felt wrong, like putting my hands on a stranger. I focused on my father, on my mother, on the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning that became my new rhythm. My hands, once trained to dance across 88 keys, learned to work in different ways, to knead bread, to mend my father's clothes, to hold my mother's hand. There was an ache in my soul, a hollow space that was once filled with music. That's when Robert came along. He was the son of a man my father knew from the factory. He was a carpenter, a good man with strong hands and an honest heart. He never talked about dreams. He talked about building things, a solid house, a steady family, a future you could count on. He saw me, a quiet, dutiful girl taking care of her parents, and he fell in love with what he saw. He saw the potential for a home, a life built on solid ground, and I saw a good man. I saw a life that was safe. After the pain of giving up my music, safe felt like the only thing I needed. I thought love could grow from security, from shared responsibility, and in many ways, it did. He was a good husband. He was never mean, never demanding. He never raised his voice. He loved me in his quiet, dependable way. He brought home his paycheck, put food on the table, and fixed the leaky faucet without me ever having to ask. But he never saw the girl who wanted to fly. He never heard the music in my soul. I remember once, early in our marriage, I sat at the piano and started to play something from Chopin. Something fast, passionate, and full of sorrow. I lost myself in it. When I looked up, Robert was standing there, a confused look on his face. "What's that song, honey?" he asked. "It sounds so sad." I stopped playing. "Oh, it's just something I used to play." He nodded, and that was the end of the conversation. He didn't ask about the composer. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't ask why I never played like that anymore. He just saw a sad song. I realized then that I could never share my true self with him. He had married the woman who could make a home, not the artist who lived in my heart. The piano became a piece of furniture, a silent monument to a life I had left behind. I kept it clean, but I rarely played it. Not for me. Only for the children, when I taught them a simple lullaby or a Christmas carol. We had 3 children. David was the first. Then came Sarah, and finally little Paul. I poured all of my passion, all of my energy, all of my unlived life into them. My hands, once meant for keys, were always busy. They kneaded bread, mended clothes, and tied little shoelaces. I helped them with their homework. I sewed their costumes for school plays. I made sure they had a childhood that was filled with love and stability. Every success of theirs felt like a small redemption for my own failures. David was a good student. Sarah was a star on the field hockey team. Paul was a kind, gentle boy who was always drawing. But David was different. He was like me. He was quiet, a thinker. He spent his time in his room, not playing with the other children, but listening to old jazz records on the radio. He was a good boy. He never caused any trouble. But I could feel a silent curiosity in him, an artist's soul waiting to be found. He was the only one of my children who seemed to understand that the piano in the living room wasn't just a piece of furniture. He would watch me sometimes, a quiet look in his eyes, as I dusted the keys. One afternoon, when he was about 15, he came to me after school. My heart stopped. He was holding a piece of paper, a yellowed, folded piece of paper. The paper that had been a part of my life for so long that I had almost forgotten it existed. My Juilliard letter. My mother, bless her heart, had kept it. She had tucked it away in a box of old memories in the attic, a box I had never looked in. David had been up there looking for something, and he had found it. "Mum," he said, his voice soft. "What is this?" I felt a sudden, sharp panic. That letter was my secret, my shame, my unfulfilled potential, my buried life. "It's nothing," I said, a little too quickly. "Just an old letter from college." He looked at me, and his eyes, so full of a wisdom that was too old for him, didn't believe me. "Why didn't you go?" he asked. "You're so good. I've heard you play when you think no one is listening." I froze. I hadn't played for real in years. I had only played Christmas songs. But he had heard me. He had heard the ghost of my music in the dead of the night, when I would sit at the piano and play just for myself, just a few notes to remember what my hands felt like, just enough to keep from going crazy. "I had to stay home," I said, my voice thin. "For your grandparents, for the family." And in that moment, I heard my mother's voice speaking through me. A lie I had told myself for decades. I was a good daughter. I was a good wife. I was a good mother. But was I good to myself? He looked at me, and his eyes said all the things he couldn't say. "And what about you, Mom? Who was there for you?" That question hit me like a physical blow. Who was there for me? No one. I had been so busy being a backbone for everyone else that I had forgotten I needed one too. We never spoke about that conversation again. Not David, not I. He went back to his life, and I went back to mine. But something had changed. The silence between us was different. It was no longer the silence of ignorance, but the silence of understanding. He knew, and he let me carry my secret. The years passed. The children grew up. They left the house one by one, for college, for jobs, for lives of their own. Robert and I were alone again, just the two of us. We settled into a quiet rhythm. We ate dinner at 6, watched the news, and went to bed early. He was a good man, as I said. He would hold my hand as we walked to the market, and he'd buy me flowers on my birthday. But we were like two strangers, sharing a house, two people who had built a life on a foundation of unspoken truths. The piano still stood in the corner of the living room, a silent witness to a life unlived. Sometimes, in the dead of the night, when I couldn't sleep, I would go down and just sit there. I wouldn't even play. I would just run my fingers over the keys, feeling the cool ivory. I wasn't a pianist anymore. I was a ghost visiting my old life. I thought that was it. That was the end of the story, a life of dutiful sacrifice, a life of quiet resignation, a story that would end with me, tired and old, sitting in a house full of dust and regrets. But I was wrong. The story had one more chapter. The day Robert died was a beautiful spring morning. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up. It was so quiet, so gentle, so much like the man he was. The funeral was simple, dignified. My children came home, and my grandchildren. Everyone said, "Eleanor, you're so strong." They didn't know that the only strength I had left was the strength to hold myself together so they wouldn't see me break. The week after the funeral, the house was empty again. The children went back to their lives. I was alone, for the first time in my life, truly alone. And I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't a mother. I was just me. Just Eleanor. I spent the first few days wandering from room to room, looking at the furniture we had bought together, the photos on the walls, the quiet life we had built. And then I saw the piano. The sun was shining on it, illuminating a thin layer of dust on the keys. I walked over to it and sat down. My hands felt old, stiff, and foreign. I hadn't played in decades. I put my fingers on the keys, and the feel of them, the cold ivory, was like a long-lost friend. I played a C major scale. The notes came out shaky, hesitant. My fingers stumbled. I felt a wave of frustration so deep it made me want to cry. How could I have let this happen? How could I have forgotten? I went to bed that night feeling a new kind of tired. It wasn't the tired of a busy day. It was the tired of a soul that had been asleep for 60 years. The next day, I sat at the piano again. I started with a simple melody, something I had taught the children. My fingers were clumsy, but they remembered. They had a memory of their own, and a little of the music came back to me, a little of the joy. I started a new routine. Every morning, after I made my coffee, I would sit at the piano. 10 minutes at first, then 20, then an hour. I went to the attic and found my old sheet music. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the notes were still there, waiting for me. It was like I was in a conversation with my younger self, a conversation that had been interrupted decades ago. I struggled. I made mistakes. I wanted to give up 100 times, but I kept going. I had to. I wasn't just playing music. I was rebuilding a life. After months of this, a thought came to me. The Chopin Nocturne in E-flat major. The piece I had tried to play the day after I sent the letter to Juilliard. The piece that had sounded so empty back then. I knew it was too hard. My hands were too old, my fingers too stiff. But I had to try. I had to know if the music was still inside me. I had to know if I could still feel. I started at the beginning. The melody was so beautiful, so full of longing. And in my old hands, it found a new kind of life. It wasn't the passionate, fast music of a young woman who was full of dreams. It was the music of a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had lost, and who had finally found her way home. I worked on it every day, slowly, patiently. One note at a time, one measure at a time. The first time I played it all the way through, from beginning to end, my hands were shaking, and my eyes were filled with tears. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I was finally free. That's what happened next. I didn't become a famous pianist. I didn't get a second chance at Juilliard. That life was over. But I found my first life again. I found the girl I was meant to be. The artist that was hiding inside the dutiful wife and mother. I am Eleanor, and I am a pianist. And my music finally tells a story. This story, my story, isn't about what I lost. It's about what I found. It's about the truth that it's never too late to live, never too late to find your own voice. and that the greatest courage isn't always found in fighting the world, but in having the strength to heal your own heart. It's a story about quiet resilience, and if you too have a story of quiet strength, a story of a life you gave up for another, please tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you a bit of strength, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Each like, each comment, and each subscriber gives me the courage to keep telling my story. The world needs to hear more stories of quiet courage, of people like you and me who found their voice again